Hi, I'm Nancy Alvarado, and this is an excerpt from my piece called Rest. Oncologists and caseworkers weighed in. The prognosis for pancreatic cancer wasn't good, and Mario's general state of health meant he wasn't a good candidate for chemotherapy. Surgery, followed by pain management, meant he'd be comfortable as the medical team figured out next steps. Not much more was promised. No one in their right mind would release Mario to his trailer to recuperate. It was a damp, dark, hoarder's paradise, the walls permeated with smoke and mold. I spent much of January and February rearranging furniture in my imagination, trying to figure out how to fit Mario into my home. Physically, I could wedge him in, a little shifting of dog, cat, daughter, and girlfriend, and there would be room. Emotionally, I wasn't sure I had another round of cancer care in me. But he was my brother. I would not turn him away if he needed me. March blew in with fierce wind and frightening talk. As bodies piled up in makeshift morgues across the country and whispers of pandemics rustled through daily conversation, I was no longer allowed to visit Mario in the hospital. Instead, I'd stop by the giant sliding doors for a squirt of hand sanitizer before handing an aide a bag containing Mario's most recent request, his wallet, a new cell phone charger, the crystal ball from the nightstand in his trailer, warm socks. With each passing week, more restrictions were added, until I faced a masked, gloved security guard looking at my own mask and gloves from behind a plexiglass barrier.
Nancy, I'm interested in the fact that everybody else is focusing on the pandemic, and you start at a point of talking about cancer, and it's something, it reminded me that we've almost forgotten about other things. And what made you decide to kind of take that tact into the story?
I really wanted to explore what it's like to die during COVID, not of COVID. And I think when we think about things like the Black Plague or the 1918 flu pandemic, we count numbers of people who died, but we don't really know anything about them. And, you hear a young man died of the Black Plague, and you don't know, did he have a dog? Did he like beer? Did he play an instrument? What was he good at? And so one of the things is the people who die of COVID have been somewhat highlighted, but the people who died during COVID have not.
And why did you feel that was important?
Because people die all the time, and obviously COVID or other pandemics accelerate it. But the other theme that I was trying to explore here is, how do you memorialize somebody who was a difficult person? And so my protagonist was a difficult person who died during COVID, but not of COVID. And so the twin themes of, how do we look at people after death? We have a tendency to deify them. We have a tendency to turn them into, the great sainted whomever. And so people dying of COVID maybe got a little more of that. They were so noble and they died of this horrible disease. And if you're dying during a pandemic and you're neither noble nor dying of COVID, you just sort of get swept away.
Yeah, I remember the first week of pandemic, I slipped and fell on the tile outside, and as I was about to hit the ground and saw like the corner of the brick, I was going like, oh no, like this is not what I don't want to be going to a hospital during a pandemic for something stupid like having slipped and fell.
Right.
It seems like there's other things going on. What was the process of writing this like? Was this a story that you'd been mulling over for a long time and this project kind of egged you on to finish it? Or was this something you wrote specifically for this?
I wrote it specifically for this. It's loosely based on experience, in the sense of that I was accompanying a family member who was dying of cancer during that time. And so the process of dealing with somebody with an illness during COVID, and again, the complicated way to memorialize him, were both sort of sitting in my mind. And the process of going to the hospital every day, every week, and because he would need things. And first it was like, can you take this to Mario? Can you put it in a plastic bag and zip it tight and hand sanitize it and Lysol it and then hand it to somebody in a hazmat suit who can take, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but to watch how even the opening to a hospital changed as COVID became more intensified was an interesting process and kind of scary, honestly, when you walk up to the hospital sliding glass doors and there's a tent outside and there are people in hazmat suits and, it makes hospitals, which sort of feel ominous anyway, feel so much more ominous when the guys in the hazmat suits are outside.
Yeah, my son had to go to an ER for something not COVID related, and he came back with an anxiety attack because the idea of being in a hospital around potentially sick people just, and he's young, so he thinks he's invincible.
But as it is, you go to the hospital and get sick. You go to the ER and you come out with 3 things you didn't go in with. And so, but it was still scarier to be met at the door with the guys in the robot suits and, going from handing belongings to the girls at the table to handing belongings to a security guard in a plastic bag, and just each week the level of protection increased, which made the level of panic increase. And so basically the story was an opportunity to sort of put that into a fictional setting and mess around with it a little bit.
Well, and then there's also that sense of the point of view of the patient where, if you're sick, you're not understanding everything that's going on. And this added layer of why can't I be with family? Why can't people, be near me? Is doubly painful and complicated.
Exactly. And I tried to address that a little bit in my piece of just how illness and delusion already cloud your mind when you're sick. And then to add to that, but why can't you come see me? And how do you explain to somebody who's been in the hospital since December that we're in the middle of a global pandemic? Like, that doesn't even sound like real words. It didn't sound like real words to those of us who were outside when we read about, for example, New York City, where they were piling bodies up in the streets. From San Diego, California, that sounded almost fictional. And so there's no way you can make that understood to somebody who's been in the hospital for 3 months already and is not maybe operating as their best self in their right mind.
And how does it feel to be a part of this project where so many different voices are being collected together?
I'm just so excited by the concept of it. I love the idea of the Decameron project and just writing our way through difficult circumstances. Among writers, we joke about, the next wave of literature is going to be it's going to be pandemic lit. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. Like, how many love stories are going to be because somebody fell in love with their DoorDash guy or something, right? Strictly pandemic themes. And so in that regard, it's a little bit silly. But on the other hand, if we really write the stories that are in our hearts and minds about what happened during this year, this really complicated, odd, unusual year, I think that's an important thing to memorialize.
And do you feel like this time frame has made you more reflective as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. I can be a little bit of a one-trick pony in terms of writing. I write a lot about border issues, and the border has ceased to be the largest thing in our minds at the moment. And it's very much made me reflective, and one thinks about one's mortality, one thinks about one's future, one watches plans dashed. And of course it makes you write differently because you process differently.
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking about your work.
Thank you so much.